12 Unpleasant Things Seniors Do as They Age That No One Tells You. Aging is a journey filled with wisdom, memories, and growth, but along the way, certain habits can quietly creep in. Habits that make life harder, not easier. Have you ever wondered why some seniors seem joyful and full of life, surrounded by love and laughter, while others become distant, frustrated, or even isolated? The truth is, small daily choices shape how we experience aging. What if no one has told you about the things that slowly push people away, or make aging feel lonelier than it should be? Many of these behaviors are so subtle that they go unnoticed, until the effects are undeniable. Some of these might surprise you, especially 10, because by the time most people realize it, the damage is already done. But here's the good news: you have the power to shape your own aging experience. A fulfilling, connected, and happy life isn't a matter of luck, it's a matter of recognizing and changing the habits that no one talks about. Stick with me as we uncover 12 unpleasant things seniors do, and more importantly, how to change them for a happier, healthier, and more fulfilling life. So before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's dive in. 1. Holding on to the past too tightly. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." His words remind us that time moves forward, and so do we. Yet many people fight against this natural current, longing for the world they once knew. In American history, after the Great Depression, many seniors clung to the memory of a time when a dollar stretched further, when life seemed simpler, and when neighbors knew each other's names. But those who thrived were the ones who adapted, who embraced the changing times rather than resenting them. I remember a man named Walter, an old friend from my neighborhood. Walter was the kind of person who could tell you down to the minute how long it took to buy a loaf of bread in 1955, how much gas cost in 1968, and how people used to have respect. He held on to those memories like a lifeline, convinced that everything had been better back then. At first, his stories were charming. People would sit with him at the diner, listen to his tales, and nod along. But over time, something shifted. He stopped asking about other people's lives. Conversations turned into monologues about the past. If someone brought up a new trend or a modern invention, Walter would wave his hand dismissively. "Back in my day, we didn't need all this nonsense," he'd say. One by one, his friends stopped coming around as often. The world moved forward, but Walter refused to move with it. He blamed young people for being too soft. He blamed technology for making things too complicated. He blamed society for not being what it used to be. But the truth was, he was the one standing still. One evening, I saw him sitting alone at the park, staring at the empty bench where his old friends used to gather. He sighed and shook his head. "People don't visit anymore," he muttered. I sat down beside him. "Maybe they would if you talked about today instead of yesterday." He looked at me startled. "What do you mean?" I smiled gently. "People want to share their lives with you, but you have to meet them where they are. The past is a good place to visit, but you can't live there forever." Walter didn't answer, but I saw something shift in his expression, a realization, perhaps. A few weeks later, I saw him at the coffee shop chatting with a group of younger folks. He still told his stories, but now he listened too. He asked about their lives, their families, their world, and just like that, the loneliness that had crept in started to fade. I wonder, how many of us are like Walter, holding on so tightly to the past that we forget to embrace the present? Have you ever struggled with letting go of what once was? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. 2. Expecting others to always reach out first. The great American poet Ralph Waldo Emerson once wrote, "The only way to have a friend is to be one." In his time, letters traveled by horseback, yet people still made an effort to stay connected. In today's world, with phones in our pockets and instant ways to communicate, many still feel forgotten. But is it truly that others have abandoned us? Or have we unknowingly built walls of silence, waiting for someone else to break them first? History teaches us that relationships are like a garden. Neglect them, and they wither. Nurture them, and they flourish. I knew a man once, Henry, a proud man, independent, strong, the kind who never asked for anything. He built his life with his own 2 hands, raised a family, ran a business, paid his dues. But as the years passed, the house grew quiet, the phone rang less, the visits slowed. He never complained, but I saw in his eyes the loneliness. Yet he told himself the same story over and over again. If they really cared, they'd call first. If they wanted to see me, they'd make the time. And so, he waited. One Thanksgiving he sat at his kitchen table, the same one that had once been filled with laughter, children's voices, and the smell of roasted turkey. But that year the house was silent. His children had their own lives now, their own families, their own traditions. That night he did something he hadn't done in years. He picked up the phone and dialed his daughter. "Hey, sweetheart." "Dad, it's so good to hear from you," she said, with surprise and joy in her voice. They talked for an hour, about everything, about nothing, and for the first time in a long time, Henry didn't feel alone. The next day he called his old friend Joe, then an old neighbor, then his brother, and do you know what happened? People started calling him back. A week later he got an invitation to dinner. The next month he met an old friend for coffee. The world hadn't forgotten about Henry. He had just forgotten that love needs tending, that friendships need effort, that sometimes we have to be the ones to reach out first. So I ask you, have you ever sat waiting for someone to call, when maybe they were waiting for you too? Share your thoughts in the comments. Who is someone you've been meaning to reach out to? Maybe today is the day. 3. Complaining more than expressing gratitude. The great American writer Mark Twain once said, "Don't complain and talk about all your problems. 80% of people don't care, and the other 20% are glad you have them." Though humorous, there's deep truth in his words. History is filled with those who faced hardship yet chose gratitude over bitterness. During the Great Depression, families who had next to nothing still gathered around dinner tables, singing songs and telling stories. They understood something powerful. Gratitude is not about what you have, but about how you see the world. The moment we choose gratitude over complaint, our lives and our relationships begin to change. I once had a friend named Edgar, a good man, honest and hardworking, but as the years passed he developed a habit of noticing everything wrong. Every conversation started the same way. "My back's killing me. Kids these days don't have respect. The price of bread, unbelievable." He didn't mean harm, he thought he was just making conversation, but slowly people stopped calling, stopped inviting him over. One evening he sat alone at the diner where he used to meet his friends. As he stirred his coffee he overheard a young man at the next table laughing. The boy had just lost his job, but instead of complaining, he was joking about it. "Maybe I'll start a dog-walking business," he laughed. His friend laughed with him. Edgar sat there, thinking. When was the last time he laughed about something? When was the last time he looked at life with hope instead of frustration? The next day, he tried something different. When his neighbor asked how he was, he fought the urge to list his aches and pains. Instead, he said, "You know what? I saw the most beautiful sunrise this morning." His neighbor smiled. "That sounds nice." Encouraged, Edgar kept going. He complimented the waitress at the diner. He told an old friend about a funny memory instead of complaining about the news. And something happened. People started leaning in. Conversations lasted longer. The loneliness that had crept into his life slowly faded. He hadn't changed the world, he had changed himself. And that was enough. So tell me, have you ever noticed how some people brighten a room while others drain it? Which one do you want to be? Let's talk in the comments. What's something you're grateful for today? 4. Neglecting physical touch and affection. The great American psychologist Abraham Maslow once wrote, "The ability to be in the present moment is a major component of mental wellness. But being present isn't just about thoughts, it's about connection." In Native American culture, touch has always been sacred, a way of sharing energy, love, and respect. Elders bless children by placing a hand on their heads. Friends greet each other with firm, meaningful handshakes. But in today's world, where personal space is emphasized, many have forgotten the healing power of human touch. Science confirms what ancient traditions already knew. We thrive when we are held, comforted, and physically connected to those we love. I once knew a woman named Margaret, strong, independent, the kind of woman who never showed weakness. She had lived through war, loss, and the changing times. Somewhere along the way she had stopped reaching out. It wasn't intentional, it just happened. Her husband had passed, her children grew up. And one day she realized it had been years since she had been hugged, truly hugged, in a way that made her feel safe. One afternoon, she went to visit her grandson Charlie. He was 8, full of life, always running, always laughing. When she arrived, he raced to the door, grinning ear to ear, but instead of wrapping his arms around her like he used to, he stopped short. "Hi, Grandma," he said, bouncing on his toes. She smiled, but inside, something ached. She wondered when things had changed. When did affection become something only for the young? That night, as she sat in her quiet home, she thought of all the people she had seen that week. The cashier at the grocery store, the neighbors on their morning walks, the woman who sat next to her at church. Not once had she reached out. Not once had she extended her hand or embraced someone first. The next time she saw Charlie, she didn't wait. As soon as she walked in, she pulled him into a hug. "I've missed you, kiddo." Charlie hugged her back, tighter than she expected. "I missed you too, Grandma." And just like that, something shifted. The next time she saw an old friend, she reached for their hand. When her neighbor told her good news, she patted their shoulder. Slowly, warmth returned to her life, not through words, but through touch. So tell me, when was the last time you truly embraced someone? When was the last time you let yourself be held? Let's talk in the comments. Who is someone you want to reach out to today? 5. Becoming too set in routines. The great American inventor Thomas Edison once said, "If we did all the things we are capable of, we would literally astound ourselves." History is filled with those who thrived because they embraced change rather than resisted it. Take Eleanor Roosevelt. Born into a world that expected women to be silent, she redefined the role of First Lady, stepping into politics, activism, and public speaking. She never let routine define her, proving that life doesn't end when comfort begins. It begins when curiosity is embraced. The moment we stop exploring, we stop growing, and growth is the key to staying truly alive. I once knew a man named Frank. He was a man of habit. Woke up at 6, had his coffee black, read the newspaper front to back, ate the same breakfast, 2 slices of toast and an egg, every day for decades. Lunch was always a ham sandwich, dinners rotated between the same 4 meals. He walked the same route every afternoon, sat in the same chair in his living room, and watched the same news channel at night. Frank liked order. He liked knowing what to expect. But what he didn't realize was that his world was shrinking, little by little. One day his granddaughter Emma visited. "Grandpa, let's go try that new diner in town," she said excitedly. He shook his head. "I eat at Joe's. Been going there for 30 years. Emma sighed. "But what if this place is even better?" He chuckled. "Why fix what isn't broken?" Emma looked at him with sad eyes. "Grandpa, don't you ever wonder what else is out there?" That question stuck with him. That night, as he sat in his usual chair, he thought about how long it had been since he had done something new, tried a new food, visited a new place, met a new person, and for the first time in years he felt restless. The next morning, Frank did something different. He walked a new route. The trees looked different. He noticed a shop he had never seen before, even though it had been there for years. He stopped inside, struck up a conversation with the owner. That afternoon he called Emma. "All right, kid, let's try that new diner." The food was good, the experience even better. Because for the first time in a long time, Frank realized that life still had surprises waiting for him, if only he was willing to reach for them. So tell me, when was the last time you did something for the first time? Have you ever caught yourself sticking too closely to routine? Let's talk in the comments. What's one small change you could make this week? 6. Talking more than listening. The great American writer Ernest Hemingway once said, "When people talk, listen completely. Most people never listen." The ability to listen is one of the most overlooked skills in human connection. Indigenous cultures in North America place great importance on the talking circle, a practice where one person speaks while the others listen with full attention, without interrupting. They understood something simple yet profound. Listening is not waiting for your turn to speak, it is the act of making another person feel valued, heard, and understood. But in today's world, with so much noise and so little patience, true listening has become a rare gift. I knew a man once, Charlie. He had lived a full life, seen the world change in ways he never expected, and he had a lot to say about it. Every time we sat down for coffee, he would talk, and talk, and talk. Stories of his youth, stories of his work, stories of politics, stories of what the world used to be like. They were good stories, but they never ended. I nodded, I smiled, I listened, but I wondered if he ever noticed that I barely spoke at all. One day his grandson Noah came to visit. A bright kid full of ideas and dreams. "Grandpa," he started, "I have something," but Charlie was already talking. About his first job, about how hard life used to be, about how kids today had it easy. I saw Noah's face change. His excitement faded, his shoulders slumped. He stopped trying to speak. Later, when Noah left, I asked Charlie, "Did you hear what he wanted to tell you?" Charlie frowned. "What do you mean?" He was excited about something. "But you never let him say it." Charlie looked confused, then quiet. He stared at his coffee, deep in thought. The next week Noah came by again. This time, before Charlie could launch into a story, he did something different. He asked, "Noah, tell me about what's going on with you." Noah lit up. He talked about his new project at school, his dreams of becoming an engineer. Charlie listened. And as he listened, something happened. He saw his grandson in a way he never had before, not just as a kid, but as a person, with thoughts and dreams of his own. From that day forward, Charlie still told his stories, but now, he also made space for others to tell theirs. And in doing so, he found something he hadn't expected: deeper connections, richer conversations, and the joy of truly knowing the people he loved. So tell me, when was the last time you truly listened to someone? Not just heard their words, but really listened. Let's talk in the comments. Who in your life deserves to be heard today? 7. Isolating instead of engaging. The American philosopher Henry David Thoreau once wrote, "I had 3 chairs in my house, 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, 3 for society." He understood that while solitude can be peaceful, humans are not meant to live in isolation. In the early days of American towns, neighbors looked out for one another, sharing meals, stories, and burdens. But today, too many seniors retreat into silence, convinced they are forgotten. Loneliness is not the absence of people, it is the absence of connection, and sometimes all it takes to change that is the courage to say, yes. I knew a woman once, Evelyn. She used to be the life of the party, the kind of person who lit up a room, who knew everyone's name, who made people feel welcome. But after her husband passed, things changed. At first, people called, sent invitations, and asked her to join them for dinner, for game nights, for Sunday brunch. And every time she had an excuse. "I'm too tired. Not today. Maybe next time." Eventually, the invitations stopped. The calls grew less frequent. One day she realized that the silence in her home wasn't temporary. It had settled in like dust on the furniture. She told herself that people had moved on, that they didn't need her anymore, but deep down she wondered, had I done this to myself? One afternoon she sat by the window, watching the world move without her. Down the street a group of neighbors was having a small gathering in the park. She saw familiar faces and heard laughter drifting through the air, and for the first time in a long time she felt something stir inside her, a longing, a realization. She stood up, smoothed her sweater, and before she could talk herself out of it, she walked outside. As she approached, a woman she hadn't spoken to in years spotted her and smiled. "Evelyn, we were just talking about you. Come sit with us." The warmth in those words nearly brought tears to her eyes. They hadn't forgotten her, she had just forgotten how to show up. That night, as she walked home, something had shifted. The loneliness wasn't as heavy, the silence didn't seem so loud, and it all started with one choice: to say yes. So tell me, have you ever felt isolated, only to realize that connection was waiting for you all along? Let's talk in the comments. What's one invitation you can say yes to this week? 8. Ignoring personal appearance. The great American poet Maya Angelou once said, "When you know you are of worth, not asking it but knowing it, you walk into a room with a particular power." Throughout history, those who held their heads high, who took pride in their presence, commanded respect. In the early days of America, even during the harshest of times, people dressed their best, for church, for gatherings, for themselves. It wasn't about vanity, it was about dignity. How we present ourselves to the world reflects how we feel inside, and when we take care of ourselves, the world takes notice. I once knew a man named Joe. Joe was the kind of guy who used to shine his shoes every Sunday, who always kept a comb in his pocket, who believed that dressing well wasn't about impressing others, but about showing respect for himself and the life he lived. But time has a way of wearing people down. After his wife passed, Joe stopped caring. First it was little things, skipping his morning shave, wearing the same shirt 2 days in a row. Then it got worse. Hair unkempt, clothes wrinkled. When someone mentioned it, he just shrugged. Who do I have to impress? At first people overlooked it, they figured he was grieving. But weeks turned to months, and Joe faded into the background. People stopped making eye contact. Conversations grew shorter. He didn't understand why, until one afternoon at the barber shop. Joe, his barber, an old friend, said as he trimmed his thinning hair, "You used to sit in this chair and talk about life. Now you barely say a word. What happened to you?" Joe sighed. "What's the point of all this? I'm an old man. Who's looking at me anyway?" The barber put down his scissors and met Joe's eyes in the mirror. "You're looking at you, and that should be enough." That night Joe thought about how he used to take pride in the way he walked out of the house, about how he used to feel good when he looked in the mirror. And the next morning, for the first time in a long time, Joe got up, shaved, put on a clean shirt, and even splashed on a little cologne. At the coffee shop, something happened. People noticed him again. The waitress smiled, a friend patted his back, and for the first time in a long time, Joe didn't feel invisible. "So tell me, when was the last time you dressed up just for yourself? Let's talk in the comments. How does self-care change the way you feel about life?" 9. Underestimating the power of laughter. The great American humorist Mark Twain once said, "The human race has only one really effective weapon, and that is laughter." He understood something profound. Laughter isn't just an escape from hardship, it's a survival tool. Even during the darkest times in American history, the Great Depression, World War II, moments of deep national sorrow, people still found ways to laugh. Soldiers told jokes in the trenches. Families gathered around the radio to hear comedians. Laughter didn't erase the struggle, but it softened the edges, making it easier to bear. Those who laugh don't avoid life's burdens, they simply refuse to let the burdens crush them. I knew a woman once, Helen. She used to be the kind of person who could find humor in anything. A wrong turn on the road, she'd joke, "Well, I always wanted to see where that road went anyway." A broken plate? Guess that's one less dish to wash. She laughed often, laughed fully, and made people feel lighter just by being near her. But life has a way of testing even the strongest spirits. Her husband passed, her children moved away, she started seeing more doctors than friends, and little by little, the laughter faded. One day she sat in her recliner, flipping through channels, nothing catching her interest. The world had started to feel dull, like all the color had been drained from it. Then she stumbled upon an old sitcom, one she used to watch with her husband. Before she even realized it, she was laughing, really laughing, and something inside her woke up. The next time her neighbor stopped by, she told an old joke she hadn't thought of in years. The next time she went to lunch with her friends, instead of complaining about her knee pain, she told them a funny story about her first time riding a bicycle. And slowly, like the first green shoots of spring after a long winter, life began to feel lighter. One afternoon, her granddaughter, who had been worried about her, finally said, "Grandma, I love seeing you laugh again." Helen smiled. "Me too, sweetheart. I forgot how good it feels." "So tell me, when was the last time you truly laughed? Not just a chuckle, but a laugh that made your sides ache and your heart feel lighter. Let's talk in the comments. What's the funniest memory you have? Let's share some joy today. 10. Rejecting help and support. The great American leader Benjamin Franklin once said, "Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn." He understood that wisdom isn't just about knowing things, it's about accepting help when it's needed and allowing others to be part of your journey. In the early days of American pioneer life, no one survived alone. Communities thrived because neighbors helped neighbors, young helped old, and strong helped weak. But somewhere along the way, asking for help became something people felt ashamed of, as if independence meant doing everything alone. But true strength isn't in doing everything yourself. It's in knowing when to accept a hand. I knew a man once, Robert. Robert had always been self-sufficient, the kind of man who fixed his own roof, changed his own tires, never let anyone carry his bags. He had grown up in a time when men didn't ask for help, they just figured it out. But age has a way of humbling even the strongest among us. One winter morning, after a storm had blanketed the streets in ice, Robert decided to shovel his driveway. His neighbor, a young man named Ethan, saw him struggling and jogged over. "Hey, Mr. Robert, let me help you with that." Robert tightened his grip on the shovel. "I've been doing this since before you were born, kid." "I've got it." Ethan hesitated but stepped back. Robert continued, gritting his teeth through the aches in his back, determined to finish. But just as he went to lift another pile of snow, his feet slipped. The world spun, and in a blink he was flat on his back, the breath knocked out of him. Ethan rushed over. "Are you okay?" Robert lay there, staring at the sky. He felt foolish, not just because he had fallen, but because he had let his pride put him there. Ethan extended a hand. This time Robert took it. That fall changed him. Not just physically, but mentally. He started letting people in. When his granddaughter offered to set up his new phone, he let her. When a neighbor offered to pick up groceries, he said yes. And something unexpected happened. He didn't feel less independent. He felt more connected. So tell me, have you ever refused help, only to realize later that you needed it? Let's talk in the comments. What's one thing you've learned about accepting support? 11. Letting fear of technology create distance. The great American scientist Carl Sagan once said, "Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known." Every new invention, every piece of technology that once seemed impossible, started as something unfamiliar. When the telephone was introduced, people feared it would ruin human interaction. When television arrived, they worried it would make books obsolete. Yet, in time, these very technologies became tools that brought people closer together. The world moves forward and we must move with it, not because we have to, but because it allows us to stay connected to the people and experiences that matter most. I knew a woman once, Dorothy. She was a proud woman, sharp as a tack, but stubborn as they come. She had raised 4 kids, run a household, and never backed down from a challenge. But when it comes to technology, that was where she drew the line. "I don't need a smartphone," she would say. "I don't need Facebook or FaceTime or whatever else these kids are using." Her daughter Emily tried to convince her. "Mom, it's just another way to stay in touch." Dorothy waved her off. "If people want to talk to me, they can call the house phone." And so, the world around her kept moving, but she stayed still. At first, she didn't notice the distance. But slowly it crept in. She missed the little moments, the photos of her grandson's first day of school, the video calls where her great-granddaughter learned to say Grandma, the group messages where her family shared their daily lives. They were all still there, still loving her, still thinking of her. She just wasn't part of it. One evening she sat alone in her living room, the silence heavier than usual. Her old friend Martha had passed the week before, and it hit her. "I don't want to disappear while I'm still here." The next morning she made a decision. She called Emily. "All right," she said. "Show me how to do this FaceTime thing." The first call was awkward. Her finger covered half the screen and she kept shouting as if the phone were a megaphone. But then, there it was, her grandson's smiling face live right in front of her. "Hi, Grandma." Dorothy's heart swelled. At that moment she realized something. It wasn't about the technology, it was about the people on the other side of it. So tell me, have you ever resisted something new, only to realize later it could bring you closer to the ones you love? Let's talk in the comments. What's one piece of technology you've learned to use recently? 12. Forgetting to dream. The great American poet Langston Hughes once asked, "What happens to a dream deferred?" His words remind us that dreams are not bound by age, they only fade when we stop believing in them. In American history, some of the greatest accomplishments came from those who refused to let time define their limits. Grandma Moses began painting in her 77s. Colonel Sanders built an empire when most people were retiring. Dreams do not expire with youth, they wait for us to claim them, no matter how many years have passed. The only true limitation is the one we place on ourselves. I knew a man once, Walter. Walter had lived a good life, raised a family, built a career, and did everything a man was supposed to do. But at 75, something had changed. He wasn't unhappy, just still. Each day looked the same. Morning coffee, the newspaper, a walk around the block. He told himself he was content, but deep down he wondered, was this all that was left? One afternoon his granddaughter Lily came to visit. She was a dreamer, always talking about what she wanted to do. "Grandpa," she asked, "what's something you've always wanted to do but never got the chance?" Walter chuckled. "Oh, I don't know, sweetheart. That's for young folks." But Lily wouldn't let it go. Come on, there's gotta be something, he thought for a moment. Well, when I was a boy I wanted to learn to play the piano. Lily's eyes lit up. Then why don't you? He waved her off. I'm too old for that. That night he couldn't stop thinking about it. He pictured his younger self, fingers dancing over piano keys that had never been his. He had spent a lifetime telling himself, not now, maybe later. But later had come and gone and the dream had been left behind. The next morning Walter did something unexpected. He went to a music store and asked about lessons. The young man behind the counter grinned. It's never too late to start. At first it was awkward. His fingers were stiff, his mind slow to learn. But then, one note, then another, a melody took shape. And with it, something inside him woke up. Weeks turned into months. One day at a family gathering, Walter sat at the piano and played. It wasn't perfect, but it was his, and for the first time in a long time, he felt alive. So tell me, have you ever put a dream aside, thinking it was too late? Let's talk in the comments. What's something you still want to do? Maybe today is the day you start. Aging isn't about slowing down, it's about evolving, about choosing to embrace life rather than letting it slip away. The truth is, the years will pass whether we engage with them or not, but the difference between simply growing older and truly living lies in the choices we make every day. So ask yourself, what's one thing you can do today to reignite a spark in your life? A small step? A new experience? A dream dusted off and given another chance? If this message resonated with you, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep this conversation going. No matter your age, there's always more life to live.